welcome to Legally Speaking with me, Tarun Nangia. Under the new criminal laws that have been introduced effective July 1, 2024, a number of steps or provisions, sections have been added which are relevant to the forensic use of forensic science in investigation of a case. Now, this is important for all of us because forensic science now is a field that expands to almost criminal cases, commercial cases, property transactions. Forensic evidence is now used everywhere. And there is a big leap that these laws have taken as far as the use of forensic science is concerned. It has been a much debated topic in the past 10 years or so. Given that as a fact, today we're going to discuss this topic with somebody who knows this subject well. I would like to welcome Niharika Karanjawala Misra. She is with Karanjawala and Company, one of India's leading law firms at the Supreme Court of India. Good to see you, Niharika, and thank you for your time. At the outset, let me ask you, from the point of view of a businessman, from the point of view of a common man, from the point of view of young lawyers also, what are the changes that have been brought in the three criminal laws pertaining to the use of forensic science?
So, Tarun, there's some very interesting changes that have been brought in with regards to forensics and technology, and some very welcome changes, in my opinion. One of the mandatory aspects is that for every crime with a punishment of 7 years or over, now forensic experts will be required at the crime scene. Now, this will require a massive increase in resources and labor. So I'm sure we can expect these changes slowly over time, but it's a very, very welcome change because otherwise a lot of trace evidence was just getting lost in translation in the beginnings of investigations. And I'll give you a few examples from cases I've worked on myself. Secondly, one thing that is being required in search and seizures, all search and seizures and all forensic evidence collection as well, is videography. And by this, my understanding of the law, it's something akin to body cam footage as used in the US. Now, this again, very useful because it also should give people subject to search and seizures a certain amount of calm, because it ensures that the police, while things are being clearly recorded, will not overstep their boundaries. They will not go out of the way to damage property. They will not go out of the way to be aggressive or push you around, because all of this stuff will be subject to placement before a magistrate, and it is to be placed before a magistrate as soon as possible. So as such, I think this will ensure greater accountability, both in terms of the investigation itself as well as the collection of evidence. And I just want to get into why that accountability in terms of the collection of evidence is so important, because I've seen myself in a few cases. We have a lot of talent in this country, but very often, either because of a lack of resources or time or training, things tend to sometimes go slightly awry. One of the cases I worked on was the Arushi Talwar murder case. That case, from the outset, was compromised because of the nature of investigation that took place. Now, one of the big things that happened was the crime scene itself was not cordoned off. Now, in any foreign country, if a crime scene is not cordoned off in 12 to 24 hours, it is considered practically a wash. There's nothing of relevance that you can glean from there because the entire crime scene has been completely compromised. Secondly, the evidence, while there were forensic experts at the scene and people were dusting for fingerprints and photographers were there and whatnot, that was also compromised in terms of either the expertise or the resources. I wouldn't make an exact judgment call, as I was not there when the evidence was being collected. However, the example I'll give you is from a domestic household. You should be able to gather hundreds of fingerprints, hundreds of them. All that was collected was approximately 26 fingerprints. Out of those, 24 were smudged. Now, what you find here is there is a problem in collecting of this evidence. This evidence has not been cautiously collected. This evidence has not been collected depthfully enough. Secondly, with the photography, while photography did happen, two things happened before that. One, the bodies of both the deceased were disturbed at the scene before the photographs were taken. This is heavily compromising to the scene, right? We know that the body of the little girl was disturbed because the lady constable who examined the body of the little girl gave a statement to the police in which she says that she, and you can tell by the timing that it's before the photographer has come, she flipped the body over, flipped the body back over again, looked at it, felt a little nervous because she'd never seen a dead body before, and left the apartment and sat outside. Now, at some level, I have a lot of sympathy for a young officer who has not been adequately trained for what they are to, for what they eventually find at the job. It's a traumatic thing. It's a hard thing. However, investigations can't be compromised in this way. Secondly, with the body of the second deceased, the photographer got stuck in traffic and there was a delay in him reaching the crime scene. And as such, since the body had already been lying in the May sun for one day, they sent it off to the post-mortem house, and the photographs taken of that body were taken the next day after the post-mortem had already taken place. So again, in terms of wounding and things like that, there's absolutely nothing you can tell from those photographs. Also, very few photographs were taken of each body, right? So you have very few options of angles of wounds, things like that. And when you are later reconstructing the events of a crime, for the purposes of cross-examination, for the purposes of argument before a court of law, we're talking 1-2 years later. All of this is extremely important to create a snapshot for you of how that crime was in that moment. Without it, you are compromised, the case is compromised. It's as simple as that. Now, we also have things like while collection of trace evidence is happening, now I was thrilled to see that it's going to be mandated in every case. But I feel that there are some precautions that should also be taken, such as the use of gloves must be mandatory, the use of foot coverings must be mandatory for anyone going into a crime scene. And I can get to that in the last part when I'll give you what suggestions I have for what thoughts I have on how the system can even be better brought forward and better improved.
Point well taken, Niharika. One thing that everyone would like to know that what are the hurdles that we have to overcome in infrastructure across now 30 states of India, because this law will be implemented for all 146 crore Indians. Some states have a lot of infrastructure, some states may not have, but the law is equal for all. What are the hurdles that we have to overcome? And of course, that will need financial support if there is inadequate infrastructure. This is to the extent of what I know, but if you could just detail it out for the viewers that how big a task is to implement the law that has been written.
This, to my mind, just the implementation of the forensic measures alone is a massive task. The Forensic Sciences Lab, Rohini, estimated, the director of that lab, estimated that they are likely to go from 15,000 cases a year to approximately 90,000 cases a year now. And anyone who works in criminal law knows that already the labs take a little bit of time in bringing forward results and things like that. So I think there would need to be a massive injection of both resources, labor, and training to these facilities to ensure that they are able to keep up with the requisite demand. If you send a forensic expert to a crime scene, however, they are not properly trained and they are not able to properly deal with it, it is the same as sending absolutely nobody, or it is the same as sending as not sending a forensic expert. Secondly, supposing they do have the adequate training, but they simply don't have the resources or they don't have what they need in order to properly collect the trace evidence from the crime scene, again, there is a problem. Another very interesting, right now I was talking from the perspectives of aid in the investigation, but some other very interesting measures that have also been introduced are with regards to tracking of criminals in probationary settings and things like that. And this is very, very important, especially for a country with very porous borders like India, where people can slip from one place to another easily. And I think this would require greater coordination with probation officers, greater being in touch with probation officers. And from that perspective, I think we need to take a hard look at the system, especially with regards to the fact that these measures are there not only to prevent crime, but also to help a person who has been rehabilitated through a prison program to not slip into recidivism thereafter. A probationary officer should not be somebody who you are simply hiding from and putting your best face forward towards them from. They should also be somebody who would be able to come to your aid in a situation where you feel that you might slip into recidivistic tendencies. And that is the best way to ensure that we see an overall downturn in crime, especially in a reoffense of crime from already convicted and released offenders. From this, we can look at certain measures in the US as well, although these are very finance high. Like some of the measures I'll give you will be low cost but labor intensive and expertise intensive, and some of them will unfortunately have to be cost intensive measures because it'll require bringing in new technology. One of the databases available in the US is called the VICAP. It's the Violent Crime Offender Program. It's a prevention of crime program, which basically has an entire database available across the states of certain convicted criminals judged by certain types of offenses with all of their information, as well as cross-referencing with victimology. Now, this is very, very useful. If we do that, if we have a proper database of victims found, bodies found abandoned, things like that, it will, over the years, we're not going to see a result in 6 months, but say in 10 to 15 years, we will see distinct patterns emerging and a distinct benefit in our system of criminal investigation. It will help the police at that point. So it has to be an investment for our future. Now, I'll give you an example of another case that was very, very heavily covered by the news, the Sheena Bora murder case. Now, in that instance, when the young lady's body was found in the Raigarh forest back in 2012 itself, just a day after the crime had occurred, the body was found in a partially burnt circumstance, largely burnt, in a forest in Raigarh. And since the body could not be identified, it was reburied in that spot. Now, that should not have been done. That should not have been done. What should immediately have been done is the body should have been gathered. Any DNA that could have been retrieved should have been retrieved. And obviously, it could have been retrieved because several years later, it was when the case actually heated up and when arrests were made. But all tests that could have been done should have been done. Adequate photographs should have been taken at the time, and the remains should have been preserved and kept, and everything logged into a database. All of this should have been done at that point in time. It is simply, to my mind, luck that has allowed them to find that body again. It could very easily have just been destroyed beyond comprehension, all DNA destroyed. So we have to make sure that at the ground level, our first responders, who are the ones who are taking these decisions, essentially, these decisions are not taken in the upper echelons of investigators. They are taken by first responders. We need to make sure that the first responders are making the sensible decisions to bring these things in and have all of the training and resources at their disposal. There will definitively be a lot of hurdles in accomplishing this, but it will be a massive investment towards our criminal justice system for the future.
One thing that comes to my mind is that though we are implementing the use of forensic science greatly under the new laws, this will be a new thing for a lot of investigators because the pan-India use have been mainly in favor of ocular evidence, as we have seen. Courts have relied on ocular evidence. What precautions do investigators need to, in a sense, be aware about? Also, there is a bit of a fear of planting of forensic evidence because then it becomes very difficult for the accused to save himself because on the one hand, you say that forensic evidence is beyond reasonable doubt, but secondly, criminal lawyers also would worry. Someone like you would worry if your client faces a situation where his evidence has been planted. He has no way to get out because science will be touted as the reason that that he's guilty. Will that make matters more challenging for lawyers? I mean, all of this.
That's a very interesting question. And planting of evidence is a massive fear that everyone in every criminal case has. One thing that I think will help this situation is diligent videography in every instance. Like, for example, if the blood of an accused is being taken for a sample, it must be videographed. It must be shown that a medical professional, that medical professional's details must be taken. They must be examined under oath as well. It must be shown that they are putting it in a test tube properly coated with EDTA at that time. EDTA is a chemical that coats the inside of test tubes to prevent the blood from clotting and for it to remain liquid because it has to be tested. Therefore, if one takes blood or evidence from that test tube and places it at a crime scene in order to frame someone, the presence of EDTA is there. Secondly, what is hugely significant is that the first evidence and first trace evidence of a crime scene be what is followed. Later evidence that comes stumbling in, supposing the crime scene is examined yet again 50 days down the line and the accused has been taken in and out of that crime scene 20 times. The presence of the hair of that accused or the DNA of that accused on that crime scene should not be given validity, right? It is only if the accused should not have been at that spot where validity should be granted in these instances. So I feel, for one thing, videography will help to a certain extent. If things are not videographed, the courts should not take investigators' words for it. The investigators must prove. It is prosecution's duty to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that a crime has been committed by the person in question, and we shouldn't allow a situation of technology to move forward. Now, for example, if the body cam footage has failed at that instance and the body cams weren't working, then that evidence should not be accepted. It's as simple as that. The rights of an accused also have to be kept at a high level because they are the ones that are going to face significant loss and a loss of their very liberty if the system is mobilized against them. So there has to be very harsh accountability. I am one to advocate, you know that I don't just complain about investigators relentlessly, Tarun. I believe that they have a very, very hard job. I believe that they face very, very difficult circumstances. But what I believe should be done is proper training has to be given. And once you are properly trained, then you must be held accountable to the full extent of whatever law is there. So if evidence has gotten compromised on your watch, you must be answerable for why it has gotten compromised. If you cannot show how you have collected evidence, or if there is doubt as to how you have collected evidence, or that you may have compromised it intentionally, the courts ought not take your word for it simply because you are prosecution. So that is one thing that must be kept, that must be guarded under close wraps if we are going to trust technology. One of the problems with ocular evidence as well is how easy it is to manipulate someone's remembrance of how a crime took place. And we've seen this. People after as little as 6 to 7 hours of interrogation, people are willing to admit that they have committed crimes themselves, whereas evidence later shows that they were absolutely nowhere near. So people also tend to remember crimes very differently. The questions that investigators put forward to you, it tends to color heavily how you recall a crime scene. So the courts have to and will take a measured view to both ocular and forensic evidence. The priority of ocular evidence over medical or forensic evidence, to my mind, came in at a time where technology was significantly more humble and it simply made much more logical sense to trust your eyes. We have moved forward from that now. So the understanding of the law and the parsing of this evidence will move forward similarly, in my opinion.
Point well taken. Now, moving ahead, see, technology moves ahead pretty fast. Now we have introduced forensic science as a part of investigation. The courts will again look at it. I think the investigator's job is tougher. The lawyer's job becomes even more tougher. But what are the other technological developments, in your view, that should also be used by investigators so that our criminal investigation technique improves, which the police, of course, can do when it decides?
I'm so glad you asked me that. There are a variety of technologies and measures we can take up. Some, like I mentioned earlier, some will be much more cost intensive, some will be much more labor intensive. Now, or expertise intensive. Now, for example, a heavy cost intensive technology, but a technology that works wonders is touch DNA profiling. This has the ability that even months later, so DNA is very robust, right? DNA is very robust. Some DNA left at a location can remain for months, even years at a time, even despite weather conditions, things like that. So what touch DNA analysis can do is it's an extremely, extremely sensitive test that can pick up runs of DNA that have happened maybe months, weeks, something like that beforehand. This is very expensive technology. It's technology that we don't currently have in India, and in some instances, we have rented it from countries like the UK in some instances, but it currently works on that kind of bilateral negotiation and renting of equipment. This is something we could consider bringing in. However, like I said, this is expensive technology and it will have to be brought in its own time. What we can maybe consider doing as a less expensive instance is what we can maybe consider doing is in those cases where investigation and examination of trace evidence is not yielding good enough results by the technology we have available, states should be more open to renting this kind of technology and going forward with it. In the Talwar matter, we had put in application after application requesting that touch DNA analysis technology be brought in to aid the investigators to finally figure out who had committed that crime. Right now, in that instance, we were turned down and it was never done. However, I feel investigative authorities should be more open to it, especially since this is an avenue available to us. Secondly, you have much more, you have much lower cost alternatives. Like for example, another low cost alternative is the use of cadaver dogs at a crime scene. Cadaver dogs are remarkable in how quickly they can pick up the scent of a body, and cadaver dogs are already available to the police. We already have cadaver dogs, we already have bomb sniffing dogs, we already have drug sniffing dogs. It is just it is a simple matter of widening the resources, making more resources available, making more training available, and making sure that to a certain location, a certain number of cadaver dogs and handlers are available where and when investigation is needed. Now, for example, a cadaver dog can sniff out a cadaver under 8 feet of water. 8 feet of water, that's a remarkable thing. In the Arushi Talwar case, to come back to that, the body of the second deceased was not located until the next day because investigators went up to the terrace, found that there was a lock on the terrace, said this lock looks old, it doesn't look like anybody has been here in quite a while. They claim that they asked for the key to the lock, but it wasn't given to them. But I mean, you're the police, break open the lock if the key is not given to you. Now, in that instance, had a cadaver dog come to that crime scene and alerted at that door, it would immediately have been known there is a body somewhere behind this door. This needs to be opened now, and this needs to be checked out now. We would have lost much less evidence because we would have gained an entire day that that body was not putrefying in the sun, right? So the use of cadaver dogs, I feel, is a low cost, it's a labor intensive, expertise intensive thing. Yes, training will have to be undertaken at a large scale, both of dogs and handlers, but it is something that can be immeasurably useful to us as we go forward. There are other high cost technologies, for example, that cadaver dogs can also help with. Like, for example, there is atmospheric testing. This was done not for the first time, but for the first really well known time in a US case called the Casey Anthony case. It dealt with the death of a little 2-year-old girl while in her mother's custody. And evidence was gathered to say They had to show whether the body of that child had spent any time in the trunk of that car. And they did a gas sampling, a gas spectronomy sampling from the boot of that car, where they, through chromatography, showed that the scents and gases gathered there were one that indicated that a dead body had spent time in the trunk of that car. Again, this is something that a cadaver dog can easily achieve, even if it is a situation where where we are unable to get the technology. We have a lower cost alternative. There was another really interesting forensic measure used in that case called root banding, where a hair from the head of that child was found, and the root had a dark band across it. This is a phenomenon that only happens after death. So it showed that the body of that child, after it was deceased, was definitively in that car. Root banding and all are not measures that we currently use in India. They are not expensive measures. They simply require adequate training, and they simply require adequate collection of trace evidence. So all of these are measures that we can put forward. And I think if the government moves forward with a happy medium of labor and expertise intensive and resource intensive measures, I think we can jump in leaps and bounds. We have a tremendous amount of talent in this country investigatively, and we will be able to jump leaps and bounds in our investigative capacities.
Thank you for explaining the last answer, where you, in fact, pointed out a few things that investigators could use to aid in investigation, including the use of cadaver dogs, as you said. Let us see how the implementation of the new 3 criminal laws happens. It's an interesting phase, given that forensic science has been given a push. I would like to thank you for explaining to the viewers this aspect of investigation, given its increasing importance, also the pitfalls where we discuss planting of evidence as a worry. We will discuss with on this issue some more with you in the next show, but thank you for joining us on this one. Appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you so much.